His TV acting career started with guest spots on The Monkees and I Dream of Genie, but he'll always be remembered as B.J. Hunnicutt on the hit series MASH. Since then, he starred on the show Providence and as Milton Lang on Desperate Housewives. But his true passion lies with political activism, having spent the past 40 years working tirelessly as a human rights advocate. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on InnerVIEWS, our conversation with Emmy and Golden Globe nominee Mike Farrell. What came first for you, acting or activism?
Activism.
Really?
Yes.
Why? How did that start?
Well, I didn't think of it as activism in particular. I was awakened to some of the realities of the world when I was a young man, and I was in the Marine Corps. I palled up with a guy, and we went on liberty together, and went back to the barracks, and there was tension in the barracks, and I wasn't quite clear what was going on. It was because he was black and I was white. This was the late 50s, and we were in Japan. And that was just sort of a shock to me. I'd been raised in, on the West Coast, and racism I knew was around. I just didn't know it was kind of that tangible, that pervasive. And then when I came back to the States and got out of the service, I drove a car across the country and drove through the South in 1959 and saw white-only drinking fountains and black-only restrooms, and I thought, this is not okay. This is not the country I thought I was hooked up to.
And the strange thing I would go at with this, the question I would ask about it is, in that time, though, people thought that was okay.
Oh,
a
indeed.
lot of people did.
Oh, indeed.
Why didn't you think that was okay?
In my community, there was a huge Mexican-American population, kids I went to school with. And I thought it was odd that when a bunch of us Anglos formed a club, it was called a club. When these kids formed a club, it was called a gang. There were just sort of things that rang wrong to me.
Yeah. And why did you think you could do something about it?
It wasn't so much a sense that I could do something about it, but that I should do something about it. I should at least make my own position known, my own view known. When I talked about driving through the South, I visited, after I dropped this car that I was delivering off, I hitchhiked back to New Orleans and visited a guy, stayed with a guy that I had met in the service, a Marine. And he was, as you just suggested, he was part of this racist community, and he was explaining to me that this was the way it was and the way it was supposed to be. And this is a nice fellow, a guy I liked. But it was like talking to a wall, and I'm sure he felt the same way about me. So there was just this lack, really, of communication, and I was trying to figure out a way to establish communication.
And what did you find worked? Or didn't it?
Well, ultimately it did. He came back with me to the West Coast and kind of assimilated, if you will, and went back to New Orleans later, went back, I guess, to Baton Rouge, and started a kids' sports camp, integrated. So I think, maybe it did.
Yeah. Now, this might sound like an uncomfortable way to put this, but you were nobody.
Indeed.
So what made you think that your reactions mattered? And the reason I ask it this way is that a lot of people will watch this and say, yeah, but he's Mike Farrell, But you weren't always Mike Farrell, and yet you cared to make these changes.
Well, I guess the thing is, I grew up in a situation in which my father was a really tyrannical figure. I mean, very dynamic, but and huge, and personality, great-looking man, wonderful, powerful guy, two-fisted, and not a soft fellow. He didn't stroke his kids, and he didn't encourage us very much. And I think, although I didn't articulate it that way, I didn't really understand it that way, there was this rage that built up in me because I was treated like a cast-off. And I think what that did was, what I think of it as now as, is that it taught me about the disequilibrium of power, that there are powerful people and that there are people without power, and I was one of those without power in that situation. So I began to identify, I think, with those without power and to want to do what I could to change it.
Yeah. At what point do you get involved in acting? When do you think, that's a way out?
Well, I had always wanted to, ever since I was a kid, be an actor, but it was for all kinds of wrong reasons.
Such as?
Well, you know, I saw movie magazines when I was this hungry, frightened kid trying to figure out who I was, and I saw people getting all kinds of attention and what I thought was love and, you know, respect. So it became a dream for me, but it was one I couldn't articulate. My dad would have destroyed. He would have been so incredibly cutting and sarcastic. He would have destroyed me. So I just shut up, and I was very shy. So I didn't pursue it. I didn't even mention it to anybody until after I got out of the service, and then I began to talk a little bit about this notion of being an actor. But the notion was, somebody is going to tap me on the shoulder and say, "You're just what we're looking for." I mean, the most unrealistic possibilities. Until a friend said, "You know, if you're serious about being an actor, maybe you ought to do something about it." And I said, in a state of panic, "Well, what do you mean?" And he invited me to an actor's workshop, and that was kind of where it all began to take form.
People talk about the acting community, the Hollywood community, as ultra-liberal. Do you find that to be true?
No. Hollywood community is a community like any other, with the difference that the successful people in it get a lot of attention in the media.
Yeah.
But there are liberals and conservatives and Republicans and Democrats and independents. People who are very involved and people who don't want to be involved, and the people who are very involved are on one side or the other of the issues. It's a very odd community in a lot of senses, and it has changed, unfortunately, over time in a way that I don't find as comfortable as I used to. But the lore of show business is pretty much that. It's not the reality of show business.
When you started getting involved, did you find a sense that you had found a place you belonged?
No, I was always trying to, I didn't find a place I belonged. I was always trying to figure out how to fit in.
Right.
When MASH happened, it was just the greatest thing that ever could have possibly happened. I was happy to be working. I worked in a soap, and I worked in a couple of series, and I got jobs in movies and other television shows and things. But there's always this sense that, you know, you're only as good as your next job if you get it.
Right.
And then suddenly there was this show that was kind of resonant of everything I believed in and thought about and felt, and I was working with people who were extraordinary and talented and dedicated and generous, and I thought, wow, I'm home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going into that show, I mean, here's a show that's already been on, too, and I think that must be, for an actor, a very difficult thing to do, to go into a family that exists already.
Very much so.
And knowing that the show represented so much of what you believed in, what were the feelings going into this?
Well, primarily, sort of that you're on the cusp of something that could be wonderful, and you could blow it sky high. and all the things you mentioned, I thought, you know, Wayne was a very, very much an integral part of this family, and maybe they're all just going to resent me for coming in and taking his place, which they didn't. They made it very clear from the outset. And then there was the thought of, what if the audience hates me for coming in and being, shoving this, from their perspective, shoving this beloved character out of the picture. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But there was always this sense that, you know, if this show tanks, and we all know shows tank for all kinds of reasons, if this show tanks in its 4th season, I'm going to wear it around my neck for the rest of my life. Yep. And I thought, I don't know if I can bear the pressure that this is putting on me.
And it's strange because I think in today's day and age, we see a lot more of this happening in shows. They redefine themselves. But back when MASH, when a show came out, and you pretty much stuck with it as it was. So for you to come in and make that change, that new character.
I don't know if it had ever, well, I guess, bewitched.
Right.
But it was not an easy thing for people to do. And actually, I told the guys when I met them originally, when we weren't even sure if it was going to work, that one thing I didn't want to do was become Trapper John, to step into his boots
Right.
and try to play that same character. I said the audience they'd be throwing rocks. And they quite agreed. They said, no, that wasn't their intention. They were going to take advantage of the fact that in the military, people transfer out and in and sometimes are killed and what have you. So they could bring in this new character.
Yeah. While you're doing this show,
Yeah.
I've talked with other members of the cast, and they always tell me they weren't quite aware how popular the show was. You didn't know your impact you were having.
No.
Did you really?
No,
How
that's
can
true.
you not know it?
Well, I had the opportunity to see the show from the outside. I saw it when I was doing a show with Anthony Quinn, actually, when it first went on the air. And I just happened on this show one day, and I saw this character, Gary Berghoff's character, Radar, in a scene in which he depicted this innocent kid in the midst of this chaos. And it was so brilliant. I thought, oh, my God, this is how lucky they are, and what a wonderful thing this could be doing in television. So I had that sense of what it was about. But when I went into it, it was another show. A bunch of people, getting together, doing the best they could, and we all just joined hands and continued to commit ourselves to doing the best kind of work. And we weren't crazy. We saw the ratings. We knew the show was successful. But I remember coming back. We had a 6 or 7 month on, 5 or 6 month off production schedule, and you'd get to go away and do other things. And I did a lot of traveling. And when I came back one time, I sat down with Alan at the beginning of the season and said, are you hearing what I'm hearing out there? And he said, yeah. I mean, it was just this overwhelming sense of appreciation and gratitude from people. Thank you for what this show is saying and doing. And I thought, I don't know what that means, but man, this is something. And even then, I mean, we knew we were in a popular, powerful show that people loved, but we didn't know it was becoming a social phenomenon.
So at what point do you realize you can use that to help with the other work you want to do? Do you consciously look at it and say, you know what, this has given me a platform to get out there and do the work that matters to me?
Well, I had been doing things. I was on The Interns, a show on CBS around 1970, and then with Tony Quinn in that following show. And I'd been involved in some political things, but I was a neophyte. I was a kid nobody knew or particularly cared about. But the fact that I could lend myself to something was meaningful to me, if not to them. But suddenly, all these things I'd been doing, when I became part of MASH, the media said, whoa, here's a guy who's involved in things and he's willing to talk about it. And I thought, why not? I've been talking about it for years.
Yeah.
Why should it be any different now than it was then? So there wasn't a conscious decision on my part to say, wow, now I have this platform, I'm going to take advantage of it. It was just, this is what I've been doing, and I don't see any reason to do it any differently.
Yeah. Did the reaction change, though, for you? Did you see, and what I mean by that is all of a sudden now you are so branded with a character. Yes, you'd been acting.
Yes.
But now when you're on something like MASH, and it's every week, and it's on the years it's on, people are expecting you to be that character.
Yeah.
So then what morphs into which? Does the character become more like you? Do you become like the character when you're out there, the reaction to people?
Well, you can't, I think, do a series of character in television over a period of time without merging the character and your own personality, or at least I can't. So there was this melding of my own, and in fact that was the way the producers worked. They got to know who we were, and they were stealing elements of personality or appreciations and adding them to the character. So I often say about BJ, people say, what's the difference with BJ and Mike Farrell? Were they the same person or were they different? I always say, well, we're the same height. But that BJ was not. BJ was a much more smooth and I think somewhat less complicated character than I am. But we were quite similar in terms of values.
So then, going out and doing the work you did, it was never jarring to those that came across it.
It didn't seem to be. Maybe it was. I can't answer for them. But people, the interesting thing that happened is that then people began to reach out to me and say, we're doing this thing. would you be willing to help, which was never the case before. It was always, who are you and what do you want?
Now, when I was younger, death penalty sounded like a great idea to me. You know, somebody does something wrong, that's so horrible, you punish them in the ultimate punishment. As I've gotten older, my views have changed on it.
Thank you.
How about for you?
No, I was raised in a Catholic household where one of the Ten Commandments said, "Thou shalt not kill," and I thought that made sense, and so the death penalty never made sense to me. And I was raised in a time when it actually wasn't much in use, but when it became unconstitutional in '72 and then reconstitutionalized, if you will, in 1976, about the time I was in my second year of the show. And I had signed a petition, I suppose, at some point about opposing the death penalty. And I got a call in the late 70s from a minister who said, "This machine is cranking up and it's going to be spilling a lot of blood, and I need some help. Would you help me?" And I said, "Sure." And that got me started in opposing the death penalty actively, and I've never stopped.
Why do you think it is our country still has it?
Mostly it's politics. There's this notion on the parts of politicians that in order to be not painted as soft on crime, you have to be a tough guy, and the way you show how tough you are is to be willing to kill those bad guys.
But makes you no better than the bad guys themselves.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. But it's a lesson that's a hard one for the politicians to learn. The people have to teach them.
How can that be, though? I mean, as you say it, I think to myself, well, if the people don't believe it, but the politicians are talking about it, isn't it the people that vote that change the politicians? Why is it the other way around?
Well, it will be the people who vote that change the politicians. We're seeing now, there was this tremendous arc from the Nixon administration on where tough on crime became the kind of ethos of the political mind, and then it's kind of spread throughout the country. So that whereas in the 60s, the vast majority of the people in the United States weren't in support of the death penalty, by the 80s and 90s, everybody, 85% of the people would say, kill. And during that period was when we were trying to raise people's understanding about what the system was actually about and the harm that was done to the society as a whole. While people in other parts of the world were beginning to understand that and put it into effect by doing away with the death system. But the politicos really kept beating that drum, and I think they were very successful in keeping people frightened and therefore more willing to support these drastic measures. But from the late 80s, mid-90s on, we have had this cascade of developments that the abolition community has been able to kind of bring to people's attention about the racism associated with it, and about the fact that it's only used against the poor, all of the real problems with the system. And people are beginning to respond. The numbers are falling in the polls. For the first time last year, people said, if given the option of life without parole as opposed to the death penalty, which would you prefer? And more people said life without parole than the death penalty. I thought that was a huge step.
Yeah. You spent time with a gentleman who was on death row when he was about to be executed.
More than one.
How does that change you?
Well, there are a couple of pieces to it. One is you want to know how to reach beyond the sense of helplessness that you have when you're talking to somebody that you know is going to be put to death by the state. And the other is the sort of survivor's guilt that happens when you walk out the door, knowing that he can't and you can. Even though I understand that in most instances he did a terrible thing, some instances he didn't, but nonetheless the system does the same thing. What I find is it makes me furious. I go back to that place of powerlessness and power, and I think about the fact that having been through some experiences in life where I've seen people transform their lives from a wretched, miserable hulk to something that is productive and positive and powerful, that we don't give these people a chance, even when keeping them institutionalized, that we don't give them a chance to reach in and recognize their own fundamental humanity and take value out of that, that instead we'd just as soon destroy them, I find to be just an incredible failing on our part.
What do you do with that anger? You said you get furious.
I do.
How do you
I try to channel it into
Yeah.
I try to channel it into communication in a way that doesn't frighten people. because otherwise, I just get mad and start raging and then just scare people away, and there's no value in that. But I learned that early on.
Yeah. What do you learn about, and I don't know if peace is the right word, but when you're sitting with someone who knows in a matter of hours that they're going to be put to death, do you learn something from how they cope with that? Is there anything consistent with the people you've been with?
No. There's a kind of resignation, I think, that's consistent. In most instances, some fight right to the very end, others don't. But no, what I think I learn in those circumstances is to try to give something at the moment that they can hang on to, so that there is a human connection, even though everything is going to be obliterated in minutes or days or weeks or months. Yeah. That we can, hopefully, if not heal, at least make an attempt at healing through reaching out to somebody.
Is the same feelings that you have toward individuals being put to death by the state the same reaction you have towards war, or are those different?
On some level, it's the same. You have sort of mindless authoritarians demanding that the rules be followed, and they're the ones that establish the rules, whether it be putting somebody to death in a death chamber or sending troops out to fight a war. But there are differences. It's an interesting question because I haven't thought about it in that way, but there are differences. I feel, in the case of the death system, I feel for the practitioners, the death squads, the people that have to plunge in the needle or pull the switch or whatever it is. And just as I feel for the troops. But the troops, in a war situation, the troops are doing what they think is their patriotic duty, and they have been so informed. Like the situation in Iraq. I opposed the war in Iraq, but it used to be said, if you don't like the war, you're not supporting the troops. And I say, well, I support the troops. Support the troops so much I want them to come home.
Support them and bring them back.
Yeah.
Is it hard to continue to fight these battles when you see where we're at in the world today?
Yeah, yes, obviously, because it's pushing the rock uphill, But on the other hand, it just makes me more inclined to fight harder because I'm a pretty naive guy in a lot of ways, and I was raised in a country that believed in the fundamental value and dignity of every individual, and that there were all men, and I expand that to mean women too, are created equal kind of idea was something that I learned and believed and clung to, and I still do. And I think that though we've gotten off track in many ways, I think everybody understands that. Everybody wants that, and it's really a function of working toward it. So sometimes the challenges are bigger than others, but it just makes me want to work harder.
And once again, I mean, no disrespect with this question, but you're doing all of this work, and then you have to go to work.
Yes.
And you get a script for Desperate Housewives
right.
or something like that. The balance in there.
Well, it's you go on one of these sets and you think, oh my God, all this money and all this time and energy, and you're putting out this? But you have to have something of a sense of humor. And for me, getting a job in a motion picture or a television show, less on stage because there's more work attached to that, but it's really a lark. I mean, it's really fun.
Yeah.
I've long put away the idea as a kid that success in the business was what was going to fill that aching, yearning hole in me. Now it's an opportunity to earn some money and to meet some people and have some fun.
Is there still the thrill walking onto a set as when you were a kid?
Absolutely. There's that magic when you go behind the walls and into a place where there are lights and cameras and people walking around saying, get ready and here we go and roll them. All of that is magical to me. It always has been.
Yeah. So will you be coming back to Desperate Housewives at all?
I don't think so. My son is dead. I don't know.
I don't know what they could do with you, but you never know.
Right. Well, he's a man with a lot of money, so that might make them want to bring him back and hook him up some way. But.
You could marry your daughter-in-law, and then she
yes.
could have money. And
she is, by the way, a doll. She is really a sweet woman.
Yeah. Okay, then as long as you bring it up, the feuding that goes on the sets, especially that show, they all really hate each other.
I was told when I came on the set, "You are so lucky." And I said, "Really, why?" "You're working with Eva." And I said, as opposed to, and they said, "No more, I won't say any more." But my understanding is, yes, it's not quite as easy as I had it to work with some of the people on the show.
Yeah. If people out there want to get more involved in the work you're doing or just get involved in general, where's the first step they take? What should they do? To
look inside and figure out how they can best help. Some people can write a check. Some people can get involved by an issue. I always think, it's important for people to recognize that they each have an individual talent or characteristic or value that can be shared and can help. You don't have to go overseas, to help in a refugee aid situation, but if you want to, they're available. I work with Concern America. I work with Human Rights Watch. I work with Death Penalty Focus. There are any number of ways. But today, if you're interested in an issue, all you've got to do is go on the line and go to Google and type in those words, and that will give you more information than you ever wanted to know.
Well, thank you for giving us the information you gave us. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Ernie. I appreciate it.
Mike Farrell.
To order a DVD of this or any episode of InnerVIEWS, please visit HoustonPBS.org.